Spotlight's back on the Iranian nuclear deal this week as US President Donald Trump is due to sign off on the landmark agreement struck with world powers 2 years ago. Trump will have to review the deal ahead of a key deadline to decide if Iran is keeping up its end of the bargain. Debka sources in Washington saying he'll denounce the pact as against America's national interests, previously calling it an embarrassment and the worst deal ever negotiated. Now saying Iran is a, quote, bad player that will be taken care of.
I believe they're funding North Korea. I believe they're trading with North Korea. I believe they're doing things with North Korea that is totally inappropriate. That doesn't pertain to the deal, but in my opinion it does, because it's called the spirit of a deal. And you will see what I will be doing in the not too distant future. But Iran is a bad player, and they will be taken care of as a bad player.
Trump also reportedly set to designate Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. But Trump's own Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, saying the president should stick to the agreement before renegotiating the terms.
We'll have a recommendation for the president. We're going to give him a couple of options of how to move forward to advance the important policy towards Iran.
Now, Debka File sources saying the administration is already formulating new options to impose fresh sanctions against Iran. First, the US military will activate countermeasures to fend off Iran's missile threats to Persian Gulf shipping lanes and naval vessels. Next, the US counterintelligence will target secret Iranian networks across Latin America. Then, intelligence operations will be intensified against Iran's ballistic missile program, and the CIA will step up its surveillance on Iranian undercover agents abroad. Now, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has threatened a decisive response if any of the parties violate the nuclear deal, saying the agreement is, quote, not reversible. The head of Iran's Nuclear Energy Commission, Ali Akbar Salehi, saying this week that if the US pulls out, Iran can fully activate its nuclear program.
The American administration's overtly hostile attitude and actual foot-dragging policies and measures aimed at undermining the nuclear deal and blocking Iran's legitimate benefits from its full and unimpeded implementation.
Debka File's intelligence sources saying Tehran has already violated the agreement by continuing to manufacture high-speed centrifuges in secret factories, as well as failing to pour cement inside the core reactor at the Arak plant and denying inspectors access to military sites, instead producing soil samples from alleged testing sites, which could be from anywhere. But the International Atomic Energy Agency, that's the UN watchdog monitoring Iran's progress, says Tehran is complying with the pact.
That it is a non-proliferation deal, which has been endorsed by the UN Security Council, that it's working, delivering, as it has been verified 8 times by the International Agency for Atomic Energy. And so it's a durable, long-term solution to the Iranian nuclear issue, which gives all sides the necessary assurances that they need, and that we expect all sides to stick to their commitments under the current deal. So this is a position which is already well known.
Rare insights into Russia's strategy on Iran and Syria. Russia has promised Israel and Jordan that war will not break out wherever Moscow has military presence in Syria. This according to Debka's military and intelligence sources that we can now reveal for the first time. This took place during the Russian defense minister's meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli army officials on October 16th. General Sergei Shoigu did say minor local infractions may occur, such as the Syrian missile attack on Israeli jets that happened on the day of his arrival, but that he can guarantee the Jewish state that it has protection from any offensive led by Iran and would not allow Israel's borders to heat up. No word on protection from Hezbollah on the border with Lebanon. Russia did deny reports that Iran was to set up an air and sea base inside Syria. The Russian defense minister also promised not to let the Turkish army invade Syria in the face of threats by Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan to conquer its northern regions, including the embattled province of Idlib. This turning true as Ankara has so far refrained from initiating a major operation there and limiting itself to posting 8 watchtowers just inside its northern border. Here's Erdogan with another line on Idlib this week.
İdlib'deki operasyon büyük ölçüde hamdolsun neticelendi. Şu anda Afrin konumuz var önümüzde. Bunların hepsi bizim için birer tehdittir. Ve biz ülkemiz için tehdit oluşturacak her alanda kararlıyız. Bunu herkesin bilmesini istiyoruz. Buralardan taviz veremeyiz. İşte daha önce de söyledik, bir gece ansızın gelebiliriz, bir gece ansızın vurabiliriz.
Now, as for Syria's political future, the Kremlin outlining a de-escalation plan between rival military forces through the creation of separation zones. That's part of a cooling down of the armed conflict ahead of the transition process. Moscow set to ask President Bashar al-Assad to sit down with the Syrian opposition and accept a power-sharing agreement. This as a 7th round of Syrian peace talks kicks off in Kazakhstan's capital, Astana. And an unprecedented attack on a mosque in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula has killed more than 305 people, including 30 children, seen as the worst terror act in Egypt's modern history. The attackers stormed into the Al-Rawda Mosque on Friday in the tiny northern Sinai town of Bir al-Abed during prayer time, riding under ISIS flags, so say sources here at Debka Files. Some witnesses say armed gunmen stormed the mosque and detonated explosives, while others say the attackers burst inside and shut all the exits except one. Men, women and children attempting to flee through the single door were then pointed at by a gunman outside to run in one direction, where armed men were waiting to mow them down with machine guns mounted on vehicles. The imam conducting those Friday prayers at the time of the shootout says the terrorists then entered the mosque and finished off any survivors.
حصل ان انا طلعت المنبر بعد دقيقتين بالضبط لما طلعت المنبر سمعت صوت زي ما يكون انفجار برا المسجد وبعد كده ناس دخلت المسجد فضلت تضرب على كل المصلين اللي في المسجد. ما شفتش والله انا شفت الانفجار برا بس طبعا الناس اول ما سمعت صوت الضرب كله ابتدى يهرب والناس طلعت على المنبر لقيت الناس متكدسه فوق بعضها كده وفضلوا يضربوا في كل اي حد بيتنفس بيضربوا عليه. ما شفتش عددهم ما شفتش شكلهم حاسس بحركتهم في المسجد بس.
Now, on the same day last year, North Sinai's branch of ISIS, Ansar Bet al-Maqdis, kidnapped Sinai's oldest Sufi sheikh, Suleiman al-Haraz, and executed him, accusing him of practicing witchcraft. Local sources reporting the small town of Bir al-Abed was repeatedly threatened by the ISIS branch, calling on the town to abandon its Sufi practices. Now, in response to the massacre, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi pledging nothing less than brute force against the extremists.
على هذا الحادث الأليم الغادر الخسيس الجبان اللي كان بيهدف إنه يحطم معنوياتنا بيهدف إلى تدمير صلابتنا بيهدف إلى التشكيك في قدرتنا هذا الحادث هذا العمل الإرهابي الآثم يزيدنا صلابة ويزيدنا قوة ويزيدنا إرادة في إن احنا نقف ونتصدى ونكافح ونحارب الإرهاب.
Part of that stand, the Egyptian army carried out raids on what they said were terrorist command centers in the Rafah region and airstrikes in central Sinai against the vehicles which mounted that deadly attack. The army claims that at least 40 terrorists were killed. But 3 years into Egypt's military campaign against ISIS, is their effort enough to tackle the crisis? Or does there need to be a new approach? A large US military presence has been stationed at the K1 camp southwest of Kirkuk in Iraq. This, according to Debka File sources, it's one of the key military bases in the oil-rich region taken over by Iraqi forces and allied militia last October. The reported deployment comes after a new report by the US Defense Department shows the number of troops in Iraq are far higher than previously admitted. Official numbers stand at 5,000 troops, but a new quarterly report by the Pentagon shows that number reaches well over 8,000. Some of those troops have headed eastwards from the American base towards Tuz Humatu, a Kurdish-majority town located 100 kilometers west of the Iraqi border with Iran. If confirmed, this would mark the closest American troops have been stationed to the Iranian border since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The US-led coalition has not confirmed nor denied the deployment. The Iraqi military deny any American boots are on the ground in Kirkuk. Meanwhile, inside the oil-rich city, there are still over 1 million displaced citizens, mostly from regions heavily damaged by the Iraqi government takeover from Kurdish Peshmerga forces. A spokesperson for the Iraqi Ministry of Displacement said the work to bring back those citizens is still ongoing.
يعني بدأت حركة عودة حقيقية يعني في كل المحافظات. الآن في بعض المناطق لدينا يعني عودة أكثر من 90%. في بعض المناطق يعني قد تتجاوز حتى 95% كمحافظة الأنبار، صلاح الدين، إديالة عودة جيدة حقيقة. يعني تاريخ 26/11/2017 في حدود 408,000 عائد فقط في الساحل الأيسر والأيمن.
Meantime, the Trump administration has issued its first warning to Iran against further expansion in Iraq in the face of an agreement to export Kirkuk oil to the Islamic Republic. CIA Director Mike Pompeo said he sent a cautionary letter to the leader of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, General Qasem Soleimani, warning against attacking US interests in Iraq and saying the Iranian government will be held responsible for any targeting of US troops. The Iranian state-run news agency Fars saying the commander of the Quds force refused to receive the letter, reportedly handed to him by a CIA contact in the Syrian town of Abu Kamal in November during the fighting against the Islamic State group. Here's those comments from the director of the CIA at the Reagan National Defense Forum in California this weekend.
And as far as the other things Iran's doing, not part of that deal, it has only increased in your eyes?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. The expanded efforts, I mean, you need only look to the past few weeks and the efforts of the Iranians to exert influence now in northern Iraq in addition to other places in Iraq to see that Iranians' effort to be the hegemonic power throughout the Middle East continues to increase. Indeed, there was a news story. It didn't get a lot of attention here. It got a lot in Iran. I'd sent a note to Qasem Soleimani. I sent it because he had indicated that forces under his control might, in fact, threaten U.S. interests in Iraq that are serving
Soleimani, by the way, the head of the
Iran
Revolutionary
Quds
Guard,
Force, the Quds Force. His commander has also indicated an increased willingness to potentially attack U.S. forces that are in Iraq with the consent of the Iraqi government. He refused to open the letter. Didn't break my heart, to be honest with you. What we were communicating to him in that letter was that we will hold he and Iran accountable for any attacks on American interests in Iraq by forces that are under their control. And we wanted to make sure he and the leadership in Iran understood that in a way that was crystal clear. We're there on an important mission on behalf of the Iraqi government, and we intend to stay there so long as the Iraqi government wants us there to continue to perform that important.
President Donald Trump has recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, launching the process to transfer his country's embassy to the city. It's overturned decades of US policy in the region and provoked dire warnings the world over. Take a listen to a snippet of that speech before we break down the repercussions.
We finally acknowledge the obvious, that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. This is nothing more or less than a recognition of reality. It is also the right thing to do. It's something that has to be done. That is why, consistent with the Jerusalem Embassy Act, I am also directing the State Department to begin preparation to move the American Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Reactions to this announcement. Days of protests continue across Jerusalem, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, as well as much of the Arab world and beyond, demonstrating against the move to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. On Sunday, Turkey and Lebanon saw mass protests outside U.S. embassies in both Ankara and Beirut, as Arab foreign ministers urged the United States to abandon its decision to move their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, saying the move would increase violence throughout the region.
القرار الذي اتخذته الجامعة العربية اليوم كان قرارا واضحا وله أكثر من شق. الشق الأول هو التعبير بلغة واضحة صريحة بأن هذا القرار مرفوض وبأن الجامعة العربية ترفض كل تبعاته وأنه يتناقض مع قرارات الشرعية الدولية.
Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan branding Israel a terrorist state and killer of children as he vows to do everything possible to reverse Donald Trump's Jerusalem decision.
Alınan karar tam anlamıyla bir provokasyondur. Ve bu öyle bir provokasyon ki bu provokasyonun arkasında evangelistler var. Bunu bizzat zaten Sayın Başkan'dan dinlemiş birisiyim. Süreci biliyorum. Açık söylüyorum. Müslümanlar gibi Hristiyanların da Kudüs üzerindeki haklarını ayaklar altına alan bu karara biz asla rıza göstermeyeceğiz.
And amid these heightened tensions, a Palestinian from the West Bank stabbed an Israeli security guard at Jerusalem's main bus station. He's now in critical condition and the alleged attacker arrested. Israel's Prime Minister, meanwhile, on a visit to Paris, saying Palestinians must, quote, get to grips with the reality that Jerusalem is Israel's capital.
Where else is the capital of Israel but in Jerusalem? Where is our Knesset, our parliament? Where is our Supreme Court? The seat of our government, the Prime Minister's office, the President's office. It's not in Beersheba, it's not in Ashdod. These are wonderful cities, but it's in Jerusalem. It's always been our capital. And Jerusalem has never been the capital of any other people. I think the sooner the Palestinians come to grips with this reality, the sooner we'll move towards peace.
But his host, French President Emmanuel Macron, telling Netanyahu he disapproves of the US recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state, echoing concerns of all the current members of the UN Security Council, who came together over the weekend to condemn Trump's decision.
La France tient à ce que deux États en paix, avec des frontières internationalement reconnues, puissent voir le jour dans la région entre Israël et la Palestine. Et dans ce contexte, j'ai en effet ainsi expliqué au Premier ministre Netanyahou ma désapprobation des déclarations récentes du président des États-Unis que la France juge contraire au droit international et dangereuse pour la paix. Dangereuse pour la paix parce qu'elle ne me semble pas servir à court terme la cause de la sécurité, y compris d'Israël et des Israéliens eux-mêmes.
Now, a bit of background. Israel annexed East Jerusalem in 1967 and declared the Holy City its undivided capital. But the international community consider that part of the city occupied territory and say the fate of the city must be decided by any future peace talks. Palestinians seek East Jerusalem as the capital of a Palestinian state. Now, Debka analysts pointing out three options for the Palestinian leadership: to either get behind Trump and tone down demands from Israel ahead of future negotiations, or to take a direct stand against Washington by aligning with Jordanian King Abdullah, the Turkish president, and the Emir of Qatar. Now, the third route would be to trust Russia's backing of Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah access as a counterweight for Trump's regional strategy. Let's bring in today's first guest to find out what they make of these options and the move to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital city. Dr. Mordechai Kedar from Israel's Bar-Ilan University joins us now in studio. Dr. Kedar, let's begin with this declaration and get your thoughts on that. Did the US recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital change anything? Or is this, as Trump says, merely recognizing reality?
Well, it's historic justice. After all, Jerusalem was and still is the Jewish capital for over 3,000 years, while it was never any capital of any Arab or Islamic state, not even one day in history.
Now, the Iraqi government and pro-Iranian forces have seized control of the northern province of Kirkuk from the Kurds, taking just a day to take charge of the multi-ethnic city and the oil fields surrounding it. The takeover comes after voters in Iraq's Kurdish region opted for independence in a widely criticised referendum that brought scenes of jubilance to the streets. But less than a month later, and all in the space of 12 hours, the Kurds' fortunes in Iraq came crashing down. A national minority robbed of its possessions at dizzying speed, with only token resistance from the celebrated Peshmerga fighters. The short exchange of fire with Iraqi forces left 18 people dead. The next day, the rulers of Erbil sent a secret message to Baghdad conceding all lands Kurdish forces occupied since the 2003 US invasion of Iraq, including Kirkuk, claimed during the 3-year fight against ISIS. Debka Weekly's sources can now reveal that Iraq also ordered Kurdish troops to withdraw from Diyala in the country's eastern border with Iran, Kanakin in the centre and Sinjar to the north, leaving Baghdad in full control there. Iraq's Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi saying the Kurdish bid for independence has become a thing of the past.
التفاوض على أساس الشراكة في وطن واحد وتحت سقف الدستور. الاستفتاء الآن انتهى، صار ماضي، حصل في فترة زمنية ماضية نتائج انتهت. كنا نتمنى هم ينهوا بصراحة، طلبناهم إذا ما راح يصير، انتوا انهوا احنا انهينا على الأرض. انتهى الاستفتاء.
Shifting to Yemen now, and the United States has presented pieces of what it said were Iranian weapons supplied to the Iran-aligned Houthi militia in Yemen, describing it as conclusive evidence that Tehran was violating UN resolutions. The evidence was presented for the first time at the military hangar at Joint Base Anacostia Bolling, just outside of Washington, by the US Defense Department, explaining that arms included charred remnants of the Iranian-made short-range ballistic missile fired from Yemen on November 4th towards the King Khalid International Airport just outside of Saudi Arabia's capital, as well as a drone and an anti-tank weapon recovered in Yemen by the Saudis. Iran denies supplying the Houthis with such weaponry. The unprecedented presentation by the Pentagon is part of its follow-through on President Trump's new Iran policy, which promises a far harder line towards Tehran. US Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley telling reporters that the collection of military debris provided irrefutable evidence of Iranian supply to the Houthis, accusing Tehran of standing in violation of its international obligations.
In this warehouse is concrete evidence of illegal Iranian weapons proliferation gathered from direct military attacks on our partners in the region. Behind me is an example of one of these attacks. These are the recovered pieces of a missile fired by Houthi militants from Yemen into Saudi Arabia. The missile's intended target was the civilian airport in Riyadh, through which tens of thousands of passengers travel each day. I repeat, the missile was used to attack an international civilian airport in a G20 country. Just imagine if this missile had been launched at Dulles Airport or JFK, or the airports in Paris, London, or Berlin. That's what we're talking about here. That's what Iran is actively supporting. Everyone has focused on the nuclear deal, and Iran has hidden behind the nuclear deal, constantly threatening to get out of it. But these are the things they're doing while we're all looking the other way. And these are the things that will be dangerous, that will lead us to the next North Korea if we don't do something to stop it.
Meantime, the US has issued a final warning to Riyadh to stop its indiscriminate bombardments of Yemen and to ease its sea and air blockades on areas under Houthi rebel control. Washington is threatening to cut off military and intelligence assistance to the Saudi-led coalition for their role in fighting Iran-backed insurgents. The country is in immediate need of urgent, unconditional humanitarian relief, with the UN saying 8.4 million people are a step away from famine, warning of a large-scale catastrophe. Since the assassination of the former president Ali Abdullah Saleh in Yemen last month, the coalition has intensified its campaign against the rebels. Over the weekend, Saudi-led warplanes bombing a wedding east of the capital, killing 10 women. Debka sources saying a strike earlier this week that killed 23 people, including prisoners, was the last straw for the Trump administration to threaten the withdrawal of its military assistance. That includes withdrawing mid-air, refueling planes, and intelligence markers for Houthi targets. Meanwhile, U.S. Aid Administrator Mark Green announcing a further $130 million in emergency aid. That raises U.S. assistance to nearly $768 million just over the past year.